Your seventh novel just came out, I think, today, or maybe it's first tomorrow in Danish, and it's about the death of your older half-brother. But I was thinking as I was reading the novel, he dies in the beginning of the novel, and there are reasons such as drinking for his death, but there could also be many other reasons for his death, and it keeps being, well, uncertain why he dies in the book. So what is the cause of your brother's death in this book?
Thank you for this easy question. And thank you everyone for being so warm when I entered. I was very moved. Yes, so that's how that was the starting point of the book, was why did my brother die? A bit more than 3 years ago, I was home. It was noon or something. I had just waken up. I was reading and drinking coffee, and my mother called me to tell me that my brother had just died, and he was 38 years old. And I hadn't seen him for 10 years. I didn't want to see him anymore. I didn't want to talk to him. He was a very violent person. He tried to kill me many times. He was assaulting women, beating women, saying extremely violent sentences all the time, you know, about faggots, about nowadays women are sluts wearing a mini dress, mini skirts. Like, he was an unbearable person, someone you could not love, and I didn't love him. So I decided to not see him for 10 years. I didn't see him, and then my mother calls me and she says, "Your brother is dead." And of course, it made me wonder why someone dies at 38. And your question is funny because actually, I started to write this book because I thought I knew why he died. This was the first impulse. My mother calls, she says, "Your brother had just died." And I said, okay, I know why he died, and I'm going to write about it. I thought my brother was, you know, the extreme realization of social determinism, of someone who was born working class, in poverty, in a small post-industrial town in the north of France. And this social determinism had such an extreme impact on him that it killed him at 38. And then I started to write the book. And I was writing for 6 months, 1 year, 1 year and a half, 2 years. And the book was bad. The book, no, it's true. It was not funny. I suffered a lot. The book was unbelievably bad. And I was reading it again and writing it. And I had 5 drafts, 6 drafts, 7 drafts, 8 drafts. And the book was bad and bad and bad. And I thought, like, what is happening? And I felt that there was something that was not right, or something that was not true in my book. Something was false in the very project of this book. And then, with time going and with thinking, I thought, but I was wrong to think that my brother died out of social determinism, because he died at 38. And no one in my surrounding, almost no one died at 38, you know? My brother, when he was 25, he was already drinking so much that he was losing his teeth, he was losing his hair, his skin was yellow, you know, because his liver was destroyed by alcohol, so it was making him look yellow. My mother was telling he looks like a Simpson in the cartoon, you know, because he was losing completely his body, you know? And my father was not like that. My cousins were not like that. My grandfather was not like that. There was something much more extreme to him. That was not something that I could explain with a sociological frame. And then I started to remember, and this became the project of the book, I started to remember that my brother had extremely big dreams when I was a child. My brother wanted to rebuild the Cathedral of Notre Dame. My brother wanted to open the best butcher shop in France. And he was saying, I'm going to train to become a butcher, and my butcher shop will be the biggest in France, and Madonna will come to my butcher, and Brad Pitt will come, and the paparazzi will come to take photos of them going to my shop because I will become so important. And then he wanted to become a real estate man. And he had those huge dreams that he was in fact trying to realize. You know, it was not like those small dreams that we can have when we say, oh, what if I win to the lottery, you know, and I will buy a castle and I will buy a boat, or I don't know, like things that my mother or father would say because they were suffocating from poverty. My brother's dreams, they were much more real. They were so present in his everyday life. Every day he was trying to realize them. But because of his social condition, he could not realize any of them. And then it made me think that part of the violence of social determinism, not only in my childhood, but in working class in general, it's the way that the violence of social determinism frames your dreams, you know? The dream of my father was to have a big red car, you know, that he could go fast with. The dream of my father was to have a giant television, the biggest of the village, and he could brag to his friend and say, I have the biggest screen, you know. Our dreams were framed by what Karl Marx called alienation, you know, like an idea of something that you think you want, but it's a social structure that makes you want it. And my brother's dreams were not completely framed by the world he was living in. And so then I realized maybe my brother didn't die because of social determinism, but he died because of a failure of the social determinism to frame his mind and to frame his dreams. His dreams were too big for his milieu. His dreams were too big for his class. His dreams were too big for his social surroundings. And because of that, he was drinking in order to forget that he had no chance to do anything. And then he collapsed on the floor of his kitchen. He was vomiting. He was dying from his own vomit. And there was nothing to save him. And then it made me investigate about that, about the opposite of what I had thought when I started the book. And it made me read Psychoanalysis, it made me read Julia Kristeva, Sigmund Freud, Binswanger, to try to understand what happens when you have something in a mind that doesn't respond to the world in the way we expect it to respond. And this is what psychology I've been working on. And that's why for these books I had to completely change my language compared to my other books.
But still, the funny or the strange thing is that you could say the same thing in a way about you, that you also didn't fit into the milieu of where you grew up, that you maybe didn't have dreams but were forced to escape from a reality that didn't match you. And I was thinking when I read this book of it as a sort of a ghost story even, or a sort of a haunting in a way that that your brother's destiny haunts you in a way and works sort of like a mirror world to your own story. Is there also a sort of a parallel, a dark parallel, where things go in the in opposite directions between your life and your brother's life?
Yeah, I mean, there are two things. First, I was much more socially determined than my brother. My dreams and my dream to escape and my will to escape came from a social surrounding of being both gay and working class in a milieu and a class that was rejecting homosexuality. And because of that, I had no choice but to dream of escaping. I had no choice but to dream of going somewhere else. And in fact, I am much more a social caricature than my brother, you know? The little faggot who grew up in the village and who goes to the city to study and to have sex with men and got into literature and go to the theater. It's a very classic story, you know? It's true. It's true. I think I was much less free in a way than my brother. My brother, nothing was pushing him to have those dreams. On the opposite. And he was having them. But you are right in the way that there is a parallel in the sense that we both wanted to escape something from different reasons, but we didn't take the same path. And this is something that took me a long time for me to realize, because precisely, when I was this young gay boy, small town boy, escaping the city, the little town where I grew up, and going to the city, I remember at this time that I was thinking, I am different and I want to escape, but the other ones don't want to escape. I thought, my brother stay in the village because he doesn't want to escape. I think I probably even wrote it in my first book, The End of Eddie. For so long I had this kind of arrogance of the class defector, of thinking that I was different and I was superior because I wanted to escape, and that my brother was inferior because he was happy with his reality. And of course I was stupid. Of course I was blind. He also wanted to escape. And in a way, everyone wanted to escape, No one was happy to live in a shitty house. No one was happy to eat at the hard discount supermarket where you buy bad food that destroy your body. No one was happy to look TV shows and movies about people who go on vacation where we would never do it, who would have fun, things that we would never have. Everyone wanted to escape. But the thing is, not everyone had the same access to the tools of escaping. And that's what Collapse is about. It's an investigation of the unequal access of the tools to escape. My brother was trying to escape with alcohol and with violence. Violence was also an escape, When he was violent, he was finally escaping his powerlessness, The moment he was violent was the only moment in his life where he had a little bit of power, where he had something. Of course, it was a stupid form of power. Of course, he was making people suffer hugely. But it was a way of escaping. It was a wrong way of escaping, And the thing is, like in a Greek tragedy, the more that my brother was trying to escape, and the more he was trapped in his life. Whereas me, as a gay person who moved to the city, met a community of gay people, of queer people, of intellectuals, the tools that I suddenly had to escape didn't destroy me, but on the opposite, they helped me. So it's almost like once again, I was mentioning Karl Marx. It's a Marxist look at the unequal access, not to the means of production, but to the means of escaping. And we are not equal in front of this. And everyone wants to escape. We all want to escape. It's not even a matter of class, Even some people in the bourgeoisie, they wake up and they think, what is my life, I wake up in this apartment and I hate it. I live with my husband and I hate it. I made children and I hate them. I hate my job. I want to live in another country. I want to start a new life. I want to be young again. I want to be crazy again. I don't want to have a touch. The will of escaping is such a universal condition. But then the question becomes who gets to escape and who doesn't get to escape.
And I suppose it's also a question of unequal. I suppose it's also a question of an unequal access to if not the means of productions, then the means of expressing your feelings. Because there's a part in the book, well, you've already talked about the way his dreams didn't match his reality, but you also reflect on the fact that, maybe he was depressed or in grief, and you mentioned Freud, but as a man of the working class, he didn't have the language or the tools to actually express that. And I think that's a very interesting shift in your writing as well, because as you said before, the tools of sociology, they no longer suited you to explain in depth why your brother's life ended that way. What made you turn to these reflections or this research into psychology?
Yeah, because I always saw this wound within my brother, and as you say, this wound had no language. He had no language, you know. No one around us would talk about antidepressants. You know, it was a very big taboo. It was considered for crazy people. It was considered for mad people. No one would, of course, go to the psychologist or to the psychoanalysis. No one would do group therapy. We were living in a social class where there were no language for mental illness and mental instability or fragility. And then my brother was living his whole life with this languageless wound that he couldn't fix because he couldn't point it out. And this kind of absence of language made him kind of, and that's what also the book is about, made him lost in time. And one day I came across this book of Binswanger. So Binswanger was a psychiatrist, Swiss-German, from Switzerland, from the German part of Switzerland, German language part of Switzerland. And Binswanger would say that a depressed person is a person who is lost in time, in the sense that when you are depressed, you don't have a past, because the past never becomes a past. Because the past, you always talk about it. And my brother was always talking about his past. It was like, when I was a child, people hurted me. People were bad with me. My father abandoned me. My mother humiliated me. Everyone left me behind. No one gave me a chance to realize my dreams. I couldn't do. And so, therefore, the past never becomes the past. The present is not a present, because the present is completely contaminated by this past, which never becomes a past. And you have no future, because you cannot project yourself, because the only thing is that you will see is the fear of reproducing the wound that comes from this past, which is not a past, you know? So when there were scenes like, after my brother died, I started to call one after the other the women that he was living with, because I hadn't seen him for 10 years, so I didn't know many things. I tried to find those women online. I called them, and those women, many of them told me, I was telling to your brother that I loved him, and instead of being happy that I loved him, he was telling me, but one day you will betray me, and you will hurt me, and you will abandon me, because my father abandoned me, and everyone abandoned me always in my life. And so there is no projection in the future, or at least like a very sick one, because it becomes this kind of circle in which you are trapped. And so it's a complete explosion and disintegration of time that my brother was suffering from. And he was, of course, completely unable to talk about that. It was strange, you know. I remember when I was a student, and at the time I was still seeing him, I would go see him, and, you know, he would be here with his beer, you know, and he would drink, and he would start saying, you know, my father abandoned me, my father doesn't want to see me anymore, my father left me behind, he chose another family because my mother's divorced with the father of my brother, and he didn't want to see my brother again. And it was like 20 years after. And everyone was telling him, okay, but come on. That's what it is. Now you have to move on. And he couldn't. And so he was drinking, he was drinking, he was drinking. And then he was drunk. And then he was drunk, he was starting to say, we have to kill the gays, we have to kill the Arabs. They are killing these countries. And then he would collapse, you know. And then the day after, it would come back again. He would wake up, he would drink, and the more years were going, the earlier he was drinking, until at the end, when he was waking up, he would drink immediately when he was waking up, you know, opening his eyes, taking alcohol next to his bed, and drinking it. And this was a kind of, yes, a time disease. And the funny thing is that Binswanger, in his books about depression, he says that the only thing that can inject time in someone's life is love. It's funny because it sounds a bit cheesy, but it's beautiful. He says only love can give the stability to a human being to finally let things go and to finally project himself or herself. But then what happens when you are no longer able to receive love because you see it as a threat? So only love could fix it, but you cannot receive it. Because when you receive love, you don't know how to deal with it. When he was drunk, he was sometimes assaulting the woman he was living with. So how could you love someone like this? Even if some of the women still loved him. That was part of the shocking and strange things and things that I was trying to understand when I wrote the book. Some women I was calling, they were telling me, your brother was beating me, but I loved him like no one else. And I thought, okay, do I take off that from the book? Because I don't like this idea? Or do I let the reality with all its complexity? Or because if I take it off, it's like patronizing. I'm giving a version that I prefer of those women. They deserve to say what they have to say, but at the same time I disagree politically with what they say. So I wrote this book in this kind of very precarious balance.
There's also a lot of questions in the books about, well, I think you can call it debt. Who should pay for the funeral? Who, again, has the right to say what kind of funeral this dead brother should have? What is the role that, well, how have you thought about, well, the question of debt in this book?
I didn't think about that. I thought about duty. I had a sense of duty to write that story and to try to understand that being, to understand that violence that was coming from him, and in a way also to understand it against my family. Because of course, when I was writing this book, it was very complicated with my family. My family didn't want me to write that book. My big sister, threatened me. She insulted me. I stopped talking with my father because he knew I was writing this book, and we had an argument, and now I no longer talk to my father. So it was a very violent and difficult family situation. But the emergency of writing the story was more important for me than a relationship with my father or no relationship with my father. The obligation of writing it was stronger. And the funny thing is, my family didn't want to know the truth about my brother. And I understood that it happens a lot with families. Families, they struggle not to know the other persons in the family, you know? When you love someone, you should try to understand them. But families, they don't do it. They try not to understand them. They try not to know. They try to avoid knowing. And I remember my sister was telling me, oh, I don't want you to write that book because you will say that my brother was an alcoholic. And I said, yes, he was. He died at 38, you know? And so alcoholism killed him. And if you want to talk about him without mentioning the fact that he was an alcoholic, as I was saying already when he was 20 years old, you know, he was a drunken guy walking by the station in the little city up north where we were living. You know, I was in high school, I was with my best friend Elena, and we were seeing my brother in the distance with a big beer, you know, walking like this. Of course, alcoholism was the whole definition of his life. And if the family want to talk about him without mentioning that, it means that they are not interested in knowing him, in knowing who he was. And of course, even my mother, I mean, I have a good relationship with my mother, but when I see her now, like I saw her last week, when she talked about my big brother, you know, she said, oh, he was so kind and so clever and he smelled so good and everyone adored him. No, everyone hated him because he was always drunk, because he was assaulting people, because he was... No, come on.
But I'm just thinking that that knowing someone and knowing the truth, that hurts.
Yeah, I don't think. I think it's more mean than that. I think families are more mean than that. It's not about fear. It's about cruelty of the cruelty of not knowing the other. I don't know. I have this feeling that there is a pleasure of not knowing the other. You know, it happens a lot in families that you say to someone, "I'm going to tell you something," and they try to stop you. They have a pleasure of not knowing, but you know, also the funny thing is that I felt lonely from every side, because I had the impression that no one wanted to understand someone like my brother, even in the political field. You know, the thing is, you know, I'm fighting a lot in France. I'm trying to fight as much as possible to demonstrate. I was fighting with the yellow vest. I was fighting against the lowering of the retirement pension by the right-wing minister of Macron. I was fighting against police violence with Assa Traoré. I was a lot in the street in the last couple of years, which is for me as important as writing. And one thing I would hear very often in the contemporary left was people talking about things like the straight white man, for example. And I remember I was going to demonstrations and I had people saying, "Oh, the straight white man." And I felt so unease, you know, because I thought, but my brother is a straight white man, and I hated him, but he died at 38 years old. And my father is a straight white man, and he's 57, and he can no longer walk. He can no longer breathe without an apparatus. His back is broken. It didn't seem fair to me. It didn't seem fair, this idea of trying to understand politics through tribes instead of trying to understand them through political processes, you know? Of course, my brother, my father, they had privileges as men. They had privileges as straight guys. I didn't have as a gay person. They had privileges of not facing police violence like black people are doing in France. So of course, I don't mean to say that it doesn't come with privileges. But what I mean is that first, what is interesting is the process, not the identity. So I think that, for example, homophobia is more interesting than straight or gay in terms of politics. I think that racism is more interesting than white or black. I think that homophobia is more, or misogynia is more interesting. And also, the thing is that those realities are not fixed once and for all, you know? And in sociology and in the world we live in, the things that gives you power at some point can be the same things that destroy yourself later. So when I say that, I didn't feel comfortable with things like big mainstream slogan like straight white men. I don't mean to say that it didn't give privileges to my brother. What I mean to say is that it gave him privileges that he certainly had, and later on, those privileges destroyed him. So it's a kind of like a dynamic process, you know? Because he stayed there, because he was drinking, because he didn't have to escape like me as a gay person, because he was not putting some things about his masculinity in questions, and it was making me trapped inside his masculinity and stupid with his masculinity. And I mean, my mother, my sister were much more clever because they are women, and women are more clever than men. Because no, it's true. Because they are here put on the side of the world. They are being, you know, put in a certain position where they have to question the world. You know, I think I talk about it here when I came for Who Killed My Father, about the fact that my father thought that he chose his life. My father thought that he chose to, you know, stop school because he was a tough lad, and then he was not submitting himself to the school system and obeying the teachers, which was considered something feminine and gay and for girls. He was drinking a lot because he was a real man. And so he was doing violent things because he was not afraid. And so all his masculine identity gave him the illusion of the freedom. It was probably a bit different from my brother, but when you compared with someone, with my mother, she didn't think that she chose. You know, it was my father who told her, you stay home, you raise the kids, you cook for 7 persons every day, you do the meal for 7 persons every day, you wash the clothes for 7 people, you do the laundry every day, you go to the supermarket for 7 people every day, you bring them to school, you go catch them at school. And she didn't think that she chose. And one day she thought, I want to take back that life that this world stole from me. And this kind of distance that made her suffer made her a more clever person than men. And so the thing is that those privileges can completely suffocate you and make you completely stupid. And then eventually destroy you, like they destroyed my brother. So writing this book felt also like trying to understand someone that my own political field would not necessarily try to understand today. No one want to understand someone like him today. You know, no one want to understand this kind of violence. We know that in the last couple of years, we recreated the mythology of the monsters in politics. In the left, it's a problem. Talking about monsters is a right-wing attitude. It's not left-wing. If you say monsters, you think you are left-wing, you are not. You are conservative. Being left-wing is about understanding reality, understanding the violence, you know, understanding where it comes from, you know. Even when Eichmann, a Nazi guy, was being judged, Hannah Arendt went there to try to understand why he was violent. Even the worst, this like absolute violence, this incomparable violence. She didn't say, okay, it's just a monster. She went and she said, I want to understand. And this is what left-wing thinking is. And today we live in a dangerous time because we are losing it. Many people don't want to do that. You probably heard recently about the case of Gisèle Pellicot. It was a French woman who was raped for years by her husband and by dozens of men, hundreds of men, because her husband was giving her drugs to her to put her asleep and was inviting men to rape her. There was the trial this year in France. It was an historical trial because Gisèle Pellicot talked about things that no one talked about before, that no one was heard talking about before. And so there was the trial, and there were people trying to understand why did this happen. And when this happened, you had some left-wing people, my side, my people, the people I'm fighting with, who said, no, you cannot try to understand those rapists or you give them excuses. There is no way to understand. And for me, that was a very dangerous attitude. Very dangerous attitude. It's our duty to understand what disgusts us, what frightens us, what we hate. I hated my brother. That's what I write in the book. I hated him. And it's not because I wrote the book that I wanted to pretend that I loved him. I didn't love him. When he died, this is the first line of the book, when he died, I didn't feel any sadness. It was nothing for me, because I hated him, because I saw women with bruises on their face, because they were with him, because I saw dogs who cannot walk because my brother was drunk and was hitting them. I hated him. But it doesn't mean that I cannot take time to understand where this comes from. And if I don't, I become a complicit of that. And we can no longer continue this new attitude in the left of banishing things, excluding things, putting them in a category of monster, bad, dangerous, and not focusing on it. Because it's not the right-wing people who will fix the problem. They love this violence. They let it go. So we better look at what we hate. Sorry, I got emotional.
Something that's astonishing in your writing is is the way that your will to shine a light on the bare facts, on the darkest family secrets, that extends to yourself. As you just said, you didn't feel a thing when your brother died. You hated him. I'm not sure that you would get many people to admit that they would keep it a secret. And I'm interested in, well, how do you do that? Just in writing, how do you write these scenes that don't make you look nice at all?
I would say it's not my fault. It happens to me all the time, not only in writing, you know. Sometimes I spend an evening with people I don't know and I say things that are really too private. And then I go home and I'm like, why did I say this? You know, why did I talk about such private and intimate things and about the deepest secrets of my sexuality? I mean, I have a tendency to, I don't know, my body doesn't know the concept of privacy. And so but it's true, it's true. And so when I write, it's funny because sometimes people come to me and they say, oh my God, you were so brave to write about this. And I'm like, oh, thank you. But inside I'm like, no. I didn't feel doing anything brave. I was just writing what I had to write about. You know, in a way, maybe this has to do with the milieu where I come from. I come from not a working class milieu, but what Marx was calling the Lumpenproletariat, so under the working class, where we didn't have jobs, but we were living on welfare with criminality, with problems, with alcohol, etc. And one of the values in this milieu, the obsessive values, was frankness and openness. You know, in the working class, we were always saying, "This guy is good because he's frank. He says things in the eyes," and we hated the bourgeoisie because we had the impression that they were so distant. You know, they were, you know, keeping very polite and not saying things directly and straightforwardly, in fact, we know that in terms of class, the rules of politeness are completely opposite, you know? So if you go in a very tight bourgeois dinner and you start to tell all your secrets about your sexual life and what you did last night, they would consider you probably a little bit vulgar and, you know, like not very appropriate. Whereas in the working class of my childhood, someone who would be polite and not say too much, we always had the impression that this person was judging us, you know, that this person was distant and thought we were not good enough to share with us and thought we were not worthy of sharing things with us. And this kind of frankness was an obsession. And maybe what I'm trying to do is to inject that in literature and to kind of inject, you know, like many values from my childhood in literature that most of the time are not present in literature because most of the writer comes from bourgeois and privileged milieus, and then they grow up with different values and they incorporate different values in literature. What does it mean to come from an illegitimate place outside of literature and suddenly to come in literature with other views, with other ways of being? I think that frankness is one of them. Emotions is one of them, you know. I talk very often about emotions. Emotions are very important for me. I write books because I want to make people cry. And you know, but it's true. And the thing is, you know, when I started to publish books, I would read reviews and I would read newspapers, and very often I would read a review saying, oh, this book is good because it's without pathos. There is no pathos. And I was like, why is it a quality? Why is it a quality to not have pathos, you know? And suddenly I realized that all the, I get too emotional. all the aesthetic of the dominant class is an aesthetic of the rejection of the field of emotion, you know? So the bourgeoisie reject the the aesthetic of the working class, because it's a culture of emotion, because they watch telenovelas, they watch soap, they read books that makes you cry, they watch cheap things that are meant to just make you cry, they listen pop songs that are about love, whereas the bourgeoisie is listening to classical music without direct meanings, without direct emotions, not projecting and imposing emotions. And in fact, class war is happening a lot around those perceptions of emotions, and I felt in the bourgeoisie, I felt this kind of deep rejection of the pathos, of emotions, of everything that is linked to that, and in the same way that I was saying about the frankness, I tried to do the things with injecting like hyper emotion, hyper frankness, hyper autobiography, which is something also I talk very often about it, but it's also something it was extremely important in my childhood. There is this, if I already quote it here, stop me, because it's one of my favorite scenes in literature. There is a scene in The Search of Lost Time by Marcel Proust, in which the narrator, who is in a very privileged and rich milieu, the narrator is reading a book, and then the maid come by, Françoise, and Françoise asks him, "What are you reading?" And she asks him, "Does it come from a real story? Is it inspired by real facts?" And the narrator, when she says that, he says, of course, she's a cleaning woman, so she doesn't understand the power of imagination, and she doesn't understand that art is about imagining stories and create new worlds. She's so attached to reality. And I remember when I read that like 500 times, because I have this caricatural French obsession for Proust. Every time I read that scene, of course I recognize myself much more in Françoise than I do in the narrator. Because when I was a child, and for us, like, reality was something we were longing for. That's what, when we would go to the movies, we wanted a movie was written inspired by true facts, in bigger letters than the title of the movie itself, because reality was our category of belonging. The same way that you can identify or belong to the category of gay or black or women or working class and go in the street and fight politically, our category was reality, because we were attached to it. We are every day like, will I go? Will I have enough money to buy the food? Will I have enough money to buy to pay the rent? Will I have money to buy shoes for the kids? And we were trapped in reality, and we wanted reality, because we were trapped in it, in the same way that sometimes when you are a gay person, you want to read gay stories. When you're a woman who suffered from masculine domination, you want to read about it. Reality was our category. And that's maybe the reason why I am unable to do anything else but autobiography, because I have this longing for hyper-reality. And I love fiction, and I'm so happy that I would hate to live in a world where everyone would be doing autobiography. But for me, it has something very trashy and working class in it that I love. Yes.
I was thinking quite a lot about a different sort of working class genre, you might even say, when I was reading the book, or sort of trashy low-class genre, which is the detective novel or even true crime. And you keep doing this throughout the book, where you sort of list facts. It says facts number 1, 2, 3, 4, and then, but also it has this credo, this refrain of, as you read in the beginning, of I don't know, I don't know. What's the relation between this big uncertainty and then this sort of almost detective novel thing you have going on?
Yeah, it's funny, because I had the impression that before I had been writing about things I knew, when I wrote Who Killed My Father, when I wrote about the book about my mother, and here it was really about writing about things I didn't know. or worse than that, as I was saying in the opening of our conversation, things I thought I know but that I didn't know. And the thing is, while I was writing the book, I was realizing that everything I thought I knew about my brother, I was wrong, you know? And so, as I was saying, you know, my brother, he had a big thing with his father, because once again, my mother met his father, they had 2 kids, my big brother and my big sister, then my mother divorced, and then this man, his father, didn't want to see his son. He didn't want to see my brother again. And so my brother created an obsession with it, why my father abandoned me and why he didn't want to see me. And one of the things that he tried to create in response to that was the dream of being a father. And he was always talking about being a father. And he had a lot of girlfriends, sometimes long relationships, and none of them would get pregnant. And so the saying in my family was to say that my brother was, how do we say that? Impotent, not able to do kids. And we were repeating it for many years. And I remember when I started to write the book, I wrote, my brother was abandoned by his father, and he had this dream of having a kid, and he couldn't have any kids, medically speaking. And one day, I called one of those women, which was, by the way, also the first time I investigated for a book. I had never done it, calling people, you know, writing down things. And I said to this woman, oh yes, and my brother, he had infertility issues. And so it made it worse for him. And she said, wait, what are you talking about? And I said, yeah, he was infertile. And she told me, no, he was not. And I said, why? And she said, but you know, I was pregnant from your brother. But when I knew it, I got an abortion because I didn't want to have a son who was an alcoholic, because I was scared for the future of this son. I was scared for his life. And I got an abortion. And your brother nearly killed me after that. We had a big argument, and he got really violent because he was saying it was a dream of his life. And for years, I was perceiving my brother through that. And I was wrong. And so in the book I wrote about this, about the fact that maybe there are many other things that I wrote about in the book that are wrong. It's just that no one told me yet. But maybe half of the book is wrong. Maybe everything is a projection of my imagination, or things that people told me that were not true. And what does it mean? It's terrible. It's terrible because knowledge is a form of power, as we know. And for me to know my brother was again a bit of a revenge against him. You know, this man hurt me, but now I'm in power because I'm the one who know. But suddenly I realize that I'm wrong, that I don't know. So my little pathetic power of knowing, I lose it while writing. And so the book is about how we try to gain power through thinking we know the others, and how much we lose of it. And you know, one of my big inspiration, I have to tell you about that book. One of the big influence on me was the book of Jamaica Kincaid called My Brother. You know, and it's one of the most beautiful book of the 21st century. And it's a book about a brother who died from AIDS. And when the book starts, the brother is dying from AIDS. It's in the early 90s when there is no medication yet. He's dying, and Jamaica Kincaid says, and my brother, you know, he probably got it from drug, or from one of the prostitutes, one of the women that he was seeing in the suburbs where he would go see female prostitutes, not for gay sexuality because my brother was straight, so it was either drug or those female prostitutes. And she writes the story of a brother and how he's dying, how he's sick, how he's trying to get some medicine. And in the end of the book, the brother dies. Sorry for the spoiler. He dies. I'm going to spoil even more. So you can stop listening if you want. The brother dies, and she goes to the funeral of the brother, and there she sees a woman. And this woman says hello to Jamaica Kincaid. And Jamaica Kincaid says, do we know each other? And this woman said, no, but I knew your brother. And Jamaica Kincaid said, how did you know my brother? And this woman say, oh, you know, because I was working in a center out of town where men who wanted to have sex with men were meeting. And your brother was coming here every weekend. And suddenly, Jamaica Kincaid realized that she didn't know anything about her brother. And she thought she knew him, but she didn't know anything. And the extreme beauty and the power of the book of Kincaid is that she kept the book that way. You know, so she could have restarted everything, but she keeps you till the last page. And she repeats several times, was it drug? Was it one of those female prostitutes? At some point, she goes to the neighborhood where the female prostitutes are, and she's wandering. And in the last page, you realize that all the book you have been reading is nonsense. But this is reality. This is what happened to all of us. We think we know the others, but we don't know them, you know? And sometimes no one proves us wrong. So we will die thinking that we know, but we will be wrong. What do we know about the others? You know, it's a strange thing.
There's a lot of beauty in the way that this book keeps the question of knowing the facts as they are, as they were in the moment opened, the way that it doesn't draw any finishing conclusions. But in a way it is in itself a conclusion of a body of work from your pen. I've seen you written that this 7th book about your family is the last book, at least for now, about your family. So maybe I'm the only one, but maybe not, that's a bit curious about what you're going to write about now. Even though I know that's a horrible question for a writer.
I don't know. I want to write about sex. I want to write about sexuality. I want to write about sexuality. But the thing is, I don't choose what I write about. You know, it's not a matter of freedom. I never feel free. That's what I was telling before. You know, when my mother called me and she told me your brother had just died, I had to write about it, and no matter the cost of it. It was a very dark period for me. It was very difficult to have my family threatening me, you know. I had to hire my doses of antidepressant. I was sleeping really badly. I was feeling bad, but I had to do it. Writing didn't make me feel better in general in my life, you know. Mostly the opposite. I dream of a life without writing. I hate writing. It's no. It's so difficult. You have to know how difficult it is. I mean, it's so difficult. And you're like, why? I'm living this life. And, you know, but I have to do it. I have to do it. It's like an obligation. It's like compulsory. It's like my body don't give me any choice. And maybe I sound like a lunatic, but I mean this comes from probably the experience of violence. The experience of violence makes you write sometime, you know. And that's why most of the autobiographical writing comes from dominated categories of population. If you look at the history of autobiography, you have mostly women, gay, blacks, and slaves, concentration camp survivors like Primo Levi or Charlotte Delbo. Because sometimes there is this kind of strange connection between experiencing violence and testifying about violence, writing about violence, which is, I mean, I talked a lot about difficult things tonight, but which is maybe the good news, is that violence contains the risk of its own destruction, because violence pushes people to talk about violence, and therefore talking about violence means to name it And naming it means the possibility of trying to dissolve it or to destroy it, you know? So violence is like, you know, when you take a bit of one virus and you create a vaccine against the virus itself. The destruction of violence is contained within violence. And this is what I am. I am a toy of violence. I am an object of violence. I'm talking because I went through it. And I have no choice, but this thing tells me you have to talk about it. So that's why I never really know what I'm going to write about, because there is probably at some point something that will hit me and will force me to write about it. And you know, one final example that I often take to finish, for me, one of the most interesting example of that is the writer Salman Rushdie, because Salman Rushdie is a fiction writer. He wrote a lot of very beautiful and very important books of fiction. He's a theoretician of fiction. He talks a lot about fictions and the importance of fiction in his books and in his interviews. And 2 times in his life, he wrote autobiography. One when he had a fatwa against him and he had to hide for many years. He wrote Joseph Anthony. And the other time when he survived a terrorist attack, he wrote The Knife. So at 2 moments of extreme violence in his life, him, who is, you know, Mr. Fiction, like one of the big representatives of fiction, 2 times in his life, he had no choice but to write autobiography suddenly. It's very interesting. It's very interesting. And this is what I feel. This is what I feel. And I mean, today, autobiography is having there is a kind of backlash. It's having a bad reputation, you know. You have so many people saying, like, nowadays, everyone wants to talk about themselves. Nowadays, everyone wants to write about themselves. First, to say that, it means to be really ignorant of the history of literature, because it's the opposite of new, you know. Cavafy wrote autobiography, Sappho wrote autobiography, Jean-Jacques Rousseau wrote autobiography, Montaigne wrote autobiography. I mean, it was not invented last week. So when people say, oh, now with autofiction, people want to write about themselves. But, I mean, no, it's much more, the history of literature is much more complex than that. And more than that, what I think is that this is a counter-offensive against people who, because, as I was saying, you testify about violence, because you endured violence, or you experienced, or you witnessed it, then when you write a biography, you bring bad news to the world, and people want to shut you up, and they say, okay, stop of this, enough of this new fashion or this new current. And the literary field now feel invaded by this, you know? Whereas if you look, it's not an invasion. There are some people who are doing it, but they are a threat because they talk about the realities we don't want the people to talk about. And so probably that's why I will continue to do it, you know. People who say autobiography is everywhere are like people who say, oh, trans people are everywhere, you know, like Donald Trump, you know. You know, he says in America, trans people are everywhere, and you have 0.5 or 0.7% of trans people, so 99.3% of cisgender people. So when something is disturbing, you have the impression it's everywhere. You know, I grew up with racist people who were saying black people are everywhere because they were scared of it. And now the literary establishment is afraid of autobiography, and so they say, oh, it's everywhere, like trans people and like black people. So I will continue.